Hello from Halifax. This is Jo with Jo to the World Creations, and today we're going to be making my flower granny square bag crochet pattern. I'm so excited to share this crochet bag pattern with you, and we're going to be getting right to the video tutorial. I'll be showing you how to make the squares, how to assemble and join the squares, and how to add the bag border and strap. All the details, such as the amount of yarn required, the hook size, as well as the step-by-step written instructions, they're all available entirely for free on my website, and there's a link to that in the description below this video. We're going to start by making the squares. We're going to make a total of 13 squares, and all the squares are made in the exact same way. We're going to start with color A. As you can see here, I've used yellow. We're going to start by making a magic circle. And I have another tutorial showing you how I make a magic circle slowly that I'll link to in the description below. Now we're going to start round 1. We are going to continue using color A for all of round 1. To begin, we're going to chain 1. Working into this magic circle, we're going to make 12 double crochet stitches directly into the circle. There's my first, and we're going to make a total of 12. You should now have 12 double crochet stitches now complete. And in this pattern, chains never count as stitches, so the chain 1 that we made to start the round does not count as a stitch. So make sure you have 12 double crochet stitches. And then we're going to finish the round by pulling the magic circle tight, and then we are going to slip stitch into the top of the first double crochet stitch that we made in this round. So don't work into the chain 1. Into the top of that first double crochet stitch, we're going to slip stitch to join. We are now going to fasten off color A, which simply means to cut the yarn, leaving about an 8-inch tail, and pulling that tail through the loop that was on our hook, pulling tight to close. Now we're going to attach color B. As you can see here, I've used white, and we're going to attach color B to the first stitch. Here's the first stitch. It's the same stitch that we just made a slip stitch into. So we're going to attach color B directly to this first stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook into the first stitch, place color B on my hook, and pull it through. Now we're ready to start round 2. To begin round 2, we're going to chain 2. 1, 2. In this pattern, we are never going to turn. We are going to be working into this first stitch, the same stitch that's attached to the chain 2 we just made. So working into this first stitch, we are going to make a double crochet 2 together stitch. We're going to yarn over, insert your hook into the first stitch, pull it through a loop, 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull the yarn through 2 loops on your hook. We have 2 loops left. Now we're going to yarn over and insert our hook into the same stitch. Yarn over and pull through a loop. We have 4 loops on our hook. Now we're going to yarn over and pull that yarn through only 2 loops on our hook. So we have 3 loops left. Now yarn over and pull the yarn through the 3 loops on your hook. And there's our completed double crochet 2 together, which counts as 1 stitch. Now we're going to chain 2. 1, 2. Working into the next stitch, we're going to make a double crochet 3 together. yarn over, insert your hook into the next stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull that yarn through 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over and insert your hook into the same stitch. Yarn over, pull up a loop, 4 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull that yarn through just 2 loops on your hook. So we have 3 loops left. We're going to do it one more time. Yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch, yarn over, pull through a loop. We now have 5 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over and pull that yarn through just 2 loops on your hook. 4 loops left on our hook. We're going to yarn over and pull the yarn through all 4 loops. And there's our completed double crochet 3 together, which counts as 1 stitch. This is what we're going to be repeating all the way around. Chain 2, 1, 2. In the next stitch, double crochet 3 together. There's 1. There's 2. There's 3. Yarn over and pull the yarn through all 4 loops. So you go ahead and do that all the way around, chain 2, and then double crochet 3 together in the next stitch, and do that all the way around and come back to the video. I'm almost finished repeating that around. I just wanted to show you where the last stitch is that you will work into. It can get a little confusing because of the slip stitch that we made to join the round with color A, and that does not get worked into. So your last stitch is this stitch right here. So I've chained 2, working into the last stitch, still make a double crochet 3 together, all in the same stitch. At the end of this round, you should have a total of 12 stitches. So this first double crochet 2 together counts as 1 stitch, and then you should have 11 double crochet 3 together stitches around, so 12 stitches in total. After this last double crochet 3 together, we're only going to chain 1. So chain 1, and then to finish the round, we're going to slip stitch into the top of the double crochet 2 together. We're not going to work into the chain 2. We're going to slip stitch into the top of that first stitch. So working into the top of this, slip stitch to join the round. We are going to fasten off color B. So we're going to cut our white yarn and pull the tail through the loop that was on our hook. Now we're going to attach color C. As you can see here, I've used green. And we are going to attach green to the first chain 2 space. So this is the space in between the double crochet 2 together and the first double crochet 3 together. We're going to insert our hook right under these chain 2s, and we're going to attach color C right here. So I'm inserting my hook into this first chain 2 space, putting color C on my hook and pulling it through the space. Now I'm ready to start round 3. To start round 3, we're going to chain 2. 1, 2. And if you've just attached a new color here, it's normal for it to be loose, and it'll tighten up as we work on the pattern, but also once you weave in your loose ends. We're going to continue working into this first chain 2 space. Into this same space, we're going to make our first corner. The first step in making this first corner is to make a double crochet 2 together. So we're going to yarn over, insert our hook into this first chain 2 space, and we're going to double crochet 2 together. So there's 1, there's my completed double crochet 2 together. Now I'm going to chain 2, 1, 2, and still in the same space we're going to make a double crochet 3 together. There's 1, 2, and 3. 4 loops on my hook, yarn over, bring the yarn through all 4 loops. And our first corner is now made. Now we're going to chain 2, 1, 2. We're going to work into the next chain 2 space, and into that space make double crochet 3 together. 1, 2, 3, pull it through all 3. Now we're going to chain 2 and work into the next chain 2 space and make double crochet 3 together. Now we're going to chain 2, 1, 2. We're going to work into the next chain 2 space, and into this space we're going to make our next corner. To make our next corner, we're going to make a double crochet 3 together, chain 2, 1, 2, and still in this same space, make another double crochet 3 together in the same space. Now we're going to repeat what we did in between the 2 corners again. So we're going to be doing the same thing twice. First thing is chain 2. In the next chain 2 space, make a double crochet 3 together, and then repeat that again. Chain 2, working in the next chain 2 space, double crochet 3 together. Now we're going to chain 2, make our third corner. So that's double crochet 3 together, chain 2, and then make another double crochet 3 together in the same space. Then once again, repeat chain 2, in the next chain 2 space, double crochet 3 together, and then chain 2 and double crochet 3 together. Now we're going to do our fourth and final corner. So chain 2, in the same space make 3 double crochet together, chain 2, and in the same space double crochet 3 together. The final step of this round is to chain 2, in the next space double crochet 3 together, then chain 2, and in the last space here, this is the last space you'll work into, make your final double crochet 3 together. At the end of this round, you should have a total of 16 stitches. Let's just quickly count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. To finish the round, we're going to chain 1, and we're going to slip stitch into the top of the first double crochet 2 together. In the top of this stitch, we're going to slip stitch to join the round. And that completes round 3. A quick note that it's okay if your work is curling at this point. It'll flatten out at the end of round 4. Now we're going to fasten off color C. So cut our yarn, pull the tail through the loop and pull tight. Now we're going to attach color D. I've used this mauve color. And we're going to attach color D to the first chain 2 space, which is the first corner. Here's where we fastened off and made a slip stitch. So working into the chain 2 space in between these 2 stitches, we're going to attach color D. So insert your hook into this first chain 2 space, place color D on your hook and pull it through. Now you're ready to begin round 4. To begin round 4, we're going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Once again, it's okay if this is a little loose. It'll get tightened up once we weave in our loose ends. We're going to start by working into the same chain 2 space, this first corner here. The first thing we'll do is make 2 triple crochet stitches. Some people call them treble crochet stitches. I call them triple, but they're the same stitch. And here's how to make one. We're going to yarn over twice, once, twice, insert our hook into the same chain 2 space, yarn over and pull up a loop. So 4 loops on our hook. Yarn over and pull the yarn through 2 loops on your hook. 3 loops left. Yarn over, pull the yarn through 2 loops on your hook. 2 loops left. Yarn over and pull the yarn through those last 2 loops. There's our first triple crochet stitch now complete. And we're going to make another one. Now we have 2 triple crochet stitches. Now we're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and we're going to make 3 more triple crochet stitches into this same space. There's my first of 3. Here's my second of 3. And there's my 3 triple crochet stitches now complete. Now we're going to repeat the next set of instructions 3 times. And note we're not going to be making any chains until the next corner. So working into the next chain 2 space, this space right here, we're going to make 3 double crochet stitches, all in the same space. There's 1, 2, and 3. So I've now completed those instructions once. You go ahead and make 3 double crochet stitches in the next chain 2 space and 3 double crochet stitches in the next chain 2 space and come back to the video. So I've just made 3 double crochet stitches in 3 chain 2 spaces. Now working into the next chain 2 space, which is the second corner, working into this space, we're going to make 3 triple crochet stitches. There's 3, and then chain 2, 1, 2, and make 3 more triple crochet stitches into the same space. Next, we're going to be repeating the set of instructions 3 times. In the next chain 2 space, make 3 double crochet stitches. And you're going to do that a total of 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. You go ahead and make 3 double crochet stitches in each of those chain 2 spaces and come back to the video. Now we've arrived at the next corner, and we're going to do the same thing that we did for the previous corner. Into the same chain 2 space, we're going to make 3 triple crochet stitches, followed by a chain 2, and then 3 more triple crochet stitches into the same space. Next, we're going to make 3 double crochet stitches in the next chain 2 space, and repeat those instructions a total of 3 times. So make 3 double crochet stitches, and then 3 double crochet stitches, and then 3 double crochet stitches. Now we've arrived at this 4th and final corner. Into this corner chain 2 space, we're going to make 3 triple crochet stitches, chain 2, and then make another 3 triple crochet stitches into the same space. Next, we're going to work into the next chain 2 space and make 3 double crochet stitches into that chain 2 space, and working into the next chain 2 space, make 3 double crochet stitches. The final step in the round is to work into the chain 1 space. This is the last space here, and into this space we are going to make 3 double crochet stitches. At the end of this round, you should have a total of 59 stitches, and you can refer to the written instructions for the breakdown of those stitches. To finish the round, we're going to use the invisible join technique. Normally when we finish a round, we slip stitch into the top of the first stitch made. But this creates an unsightly bump. Another reason we want to use this technique is in this first group of stitches, there are only 2 actual stitches because we don't work into the chains. So by using this technique, which resembles a stitch, we will now have the same number of stitches on the top and the bottom and the sides, which is really helpful when joining the squares together. Here is how we do the invisible join technique. First, we're going to cut the yarn that's attached to our skein, leaving about an 8-inch tail. Now we're going to pull that tail through our stitch. And don't worry, your work's not going to come undone. Just pull that tail all the way through your stitch. Now we're going to put that tail through our yarn needle. With our tail now on our yarn needle, we're going to bring our yarn needle through the first stitch made. Not the chains, but the top of the very first triple crochet stitch that we made in the round. And we're going to put our yarn needle through both loops of that first stitch and pull it all the way through. Now we're going to put our yarn needle through the last stitch made in the round in the back loop only. We're going to put it through the back loop, but we're also going to put it through another loop. To show you where we're going to put it, just turn your work over slightly. Here's the back loop of that last stitch made in the round, and there's another loop right beside it that's parallel to this back loop. So we're going to be putting our yarn needle through the back loop and this other loop that's parallel to the back loop. So insert your hook into the back loop only of the last stitch and also through the loop that's parallel to that back loop and pull it all the way through. Now we want to be careful not to pull too tight. See right here, it's now resembling a stitch, and we want to keep it that way, so we don't want to pull it too tight. We are now going to weave this tail into the back of our work, into the backs of stitches, just like you would if you were weaving in other ends. The one caveat to this is that we really don't want to be pulling the yarn too tightly, and if you see how it got a little tight there, just loosen it up so that it still resembles a stitch. But we want to make sure it's nice and secure. So we're going to keep weaving in this end into backs of stitches, hiding it in the back of our work, but we're going to go into the opposite direction to make sure that it's nice and secure. And you can do this a couple times to make sure it's nice and secure, but keep checking to make sure it's not too tight. And it does go down a little bit. That's absolutely okay. We just don't want it too tight. So you can do this a couple of times. Once your tail is nice and secure and hidden, you're going to cut the remaining yarn. And now you have a beautiful invisible join. And the last step in making our squares is to weave in all the other loose ends. You go ahead and make 13 squares, and once you have 13 squares made, come back to the video. Now we're going to assemble the squares. We're going to start with the front of the bag. We are going to lay out 5 squares, just like this, with the wrong sides, the back of the square facing up. So this is the front, this is the back, this is the wrong side. We want 5 squares in this position, all with the wrong sides facing up. And this is going to be the front of our bag. So the outside of the squares will be on the front. It doesn't matter which direction the tops or bottoms and sides are pointing towards. The squares all look the same on each side, so you can have them pointing in any direction. Next, add squares for the sides. So put a square for this side and put a square for this side, ensuring the backs or wrong sides are facing up. And lastly, add a square for the bottom. Once again, the wrong side or back should be facing up. Now we're going to secure the squares, and you can use stitch markers or any yarn or string. So I'm just going to use scrap yarn here. And for this middle square, we're going to connect all the squares that are attached to that middle square by putting your stitch marker or scrap yarn through the chain 2 spaces, just to hold everything together, which is going to make it easier when we join the squares. You can use a yarn needle or your fingers and just put the stitch markers or the yarn through all the chain 2 spaces. It does not need to be pretty. This is just to help us keep all the squares together and remember the order of the squares. So as you can see here, I've just connected all the squares, and I'm going to repeat this for this group, and this group. As you can see, I've just secured all those squares. Next, we're going to fold the sides and bottom squares in half. So take this first side square and fold it in half. Now take the other side square and fold it in half. And finally, take the bottom square and fold it in half. Next, we're going to lay out the 5 squares for the back of the bag. And this time, we are going to place the squares with the right side or fronts of the squares facing up. So the wrong side or the back of the square is facing down, and it's going right on top of the squares for the front. So here's the right side, and I'm placing it on top. Once again, it doesn't matter which directions the tops or bottoms are pointing towards. Now we're going to secure the back squares just like we did on the front. So we'll be securing this group of squares, this group, and this group. I've just secured all the squares on the back. If you still find that the squares are going all over the place as you join, you could also secure these corners here, which would really help. Just to ensure all my squares stay secure for this video, I've also held together all the other corners. So this is the back of our bag. We're now going to flip over the bag so that the front of the bag is facing us. Now put a stitch marker in the top left square's chain 2 space, just so you can know exactly which side is the front. We're now ready to join our squares, but the first two squares we're going to join are the squares on the back. So let's flip the bag over so the back of the bag is now facing us. As you will see in the written instructions, I've labeled each square with a letter. As per the legend for the back of the bag, this is square F and this is square H. And we're going to start joining right here and join these two squares together. To make it easier to work into, I'm going to rotate the bag so that I can easily work in to square F and square H. Before we get started joining the actual bag, I thought it'd be helpful to show you how to make flat slip stitches, which is how we're going to join the squares, on squares of two different colors and with a different joining color so you can really clearly see what I'm doing. The first thing we'll do is make a slip knot. Place that slip knot on your hook and pull tight. We're always going to be joining two squares at once. Each square has 2 chain stitches in the bottom corner, then the same number of stitches all the way up the side, and 2 chain stitches at the top. Same with the square on your left. 2 chain stitches, same number of stitches, and 2 chain stitches at the top. We're always going to be working into the outer loops of all the stitches. The outer loops are the loops that are furthest away from the inside of the square. So these loops here are all the inner loops, and we're never going to work into those. On the square on your left, the outer loops, once again, are the loops furthest away from the inside of the square. So when we join the squares together, we'll always insert our hook into the outer loop of the square on our right and the outer loop of the square on our left. When joining squares in columns, or when we join the bottom squares, we're always going to work into the second of 2 chain stitches here at the bottom. Then we'll be working into the corresponding stitches all the way up, which means we'll be working into the first stitch on the right square and the first stitch on the left square, all the way up until the second 2 chain stitches. When we get to the top, we'll only be working in the first of 2 chain stitches. I'll explain more as we start joining. We have our slip knot on our hook, and I'm going to move the working yarn in between my 2 squares. I'm going to pick up the square on my right and insert my hook into that second chain into the outer loop only from right to left so that my hook comes out in between the 2 squares. Now I'm going to insert my hook into the outer loop of the second chain on the square on my left, but I'm going to insert my hook from left to right so that my hook comes out in between the 2 squares. I now have 3 loops on my hook. I'm going to ensure that my working yarn is always under those 3 loops. Now I'm going to pick up that working yarn, yarn over, and pull the working yarn through all 3 loops. And now we have our first flat slip stitch completed. Now we're going to work into the corresponding stitches all the way up. Here's the first stitch on the square on our right, and here's the top, and here's the outer loop that we're going to be working into. Insert our hook into the outer loop. Now we're going to work into the first stitch on the square on our left, into the top and into the outer loop of that first stitch. Ensure our working yarn is under our loops, yarn over, and pull it through all 3 loops on our hook. There's our second flat slip stitch now made. Now this is very, very important. You don't want to make your stitches too tight. It will pull on your work if the stitches are too tight. If you find you're making these slip stitches very tightly, I would suggest going up a full hook size. It's that important that we keep these slip stitches very loose. Now we're going to work into the second stitch of the right square, inserting our hook to the outer loop of that second stitch on the right square and inserting our hook into the top of the second stitch here, outer loop of the corresponding stitch. At one point, you may get to an invisible join, where we use the invisible join technique to finish the round. When you get to that place, what you're going to do is insert your hook into the outer loop only of that invisible join and treat it the same way you would any other stitch. Nothing special happens during the invisible join. So we're going to continue making flat slip stitches into the corresponding stitches all the way up the sides of the two squares. So I've made my flat slip stitches into corresponding stitches all the way up. I have one more stitch to work into before I get to the two chains at the tops of the squares. So you can see here, here's my last stitch. I'm going to work into the outer loop of this last stitch and into the outer loop of the last stitch on the other square. When we get to the two chain stitches at the tops, we're only going to work into the first of two. So there's the first of two, first of two. We're not going to work into the second of two chain stitches at the top. And into the outer loop of the other first chain, make our last slip stitch of these two squares. Now let's apply this technique to our actual bag. So with the back of the bag facing us, we're going to join squares F and square H. And we're going to start right here and join all the squares in column 1 all the way down the back. So I'm going to start by making a slip knot, placing the loop on my hook and pulling tight. Now I'm going to remove my strand of yarn that's holding this group of squares together. I'm moving my working yarn in between the squares. Starting with square F, we're going to start by working into the second chain into the outer loop. And on square H here, we're going to work into the second chain into the outer loop. Inserting my hook into that outer loop and into the outer loop of square H. Yarn over and pull that yarn through all 3 loops on our hook. Now I'm going to work into each corresponding stitch all the way up. I'm now going to reattach the strand of yarn that I just cut to keep my squares secure. And I'll be doing this throughout the pattern. Every time I approach where there's a stitch marker or strand of yarn, I'll remove that and then replace it when I'm done working in that area. And we only have to keep replacing them until the joining actually holds all the squares in place. I'm nearing the 2 top chain stitches, and I have one last stitch to work into before the chains. So this is the top of this stitch here. And now I'm going to work into the outer loop of that first chain on the right square and the first chain on the left square. Now we're ready to join the next two squares, which is square L and square I. Nothing special really happens, but I thought it'd be easier to show you with multicolored squares and a different color joining line so you can clearly see what I'm doing. We're going to start with the square on our right. This one's folded in half, but that doesn't matter. We're still going to do the exact same thing. We're going to work into the second chain, into the outer loop, and then work into the corresponding stitches all the way up. And we're going to insert our hook into the second chain of the square on our left, into the outer loop of this second chain right here, and then into the corresponding stitches all the way up. So I haven't fastened off. I'm still using the same strand of yarn. I'm going to insert my hook into the second chain and insert my hook into the outer loop of the second chain, the square on my left. Sure, my working yarn is under those 3 loops, and especially for this first stitch, just make sure everything is nice and tight, but not too tight. And then yarn over and pull that yarn through all 3 loops on your hook. And now work into the corresponding stitches all the way up. So now let's do this on the bag. We're going to work into the second chain to the outer loop and the second chain into the outer loop. Oh, I'm sorry, my hand was covering that. This is the second chain. Here's the first chain, here's the second chain, and we're going to insert our hook into the outer loop of this second chain right here. So working into the outer loop of the right square and the outer loop of the left square. Make sure everything's nice and tight, but not too tight, and yarn over and pull that yarn through. And now simply resume making flat slip stitches in each corresponding stitch. I'm nearing the top here. We're going to continue joining the corresponding stitches. So here I have 1 stitch left before the chains. And then I have my 2 chains here, and we're only going to work into the first of 2. There's 1, and there's the first of 2 on the other square. At this point, we are not going to fasten off. We are going to rotate our bag so that the front of our bag is facing us, and we're going to continue working along this column, but on the front of the bag. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to flip my work over. And now I'm going to continue along, joining square L and square E. You might be a little confused because normally we join 2 new squares. So whenever we join 2 new squares, we always work into the second of 2 chain stitches. Well, on this folded square here, we've already worked into it, but nothing changes. We're still working into the second chain. So we'll start by working into the second chain of the square on our right, and then work into the corresponding stitches. And we'll start by working into the second chain of the square on our left. So continuing right where we left off with the folded square here, work into the outer loop, and then of this new square here, work into the second chain only, outer loop, and make a flat slip stitch. And now go back to making flat slip stitches all the way until the next 2 chains. I am now at the chains, and we're only going to work into the first of 2 chain stitches at the top as usual. And now we're going to join square B and C. So inserting our hook into the second chain to the outer loop of square B, the second chain of the outer loop of of square C. Just make sure everything's nice and tight. Yarn over and pull that yarn through all 3 loops. It's okay if you need to help it along a little bit. And then resume making flat slip stitches into the corresponding stitches all the way up. I'm right now at an invisible join, so I don't do anything different. I just insert my hook into that outer loop of the invisible join and join it to the corresponding stitch on the other square. And I'm going to finish joining squares B and C by working into the first of 2 chain stitches. Joining B and C were the last 2 squares in the column, so now we're going to remove our hook and fasten off, leaving about an 8-inch tail. And pull that tail through the loop that was on your hook. Now we're ready to start column 2. As we can see here, we're looking at the front of the bag. So we start column 2 on the back of our bag. So let's flip our bag over. Column 2 starts by joining squares G and K. So let's rotate our work so that we can start right here for column 2. So we're going to attach our yarn right here and work all the way down. The first thing we're going to do is make a slip knot. And we're going to be doing the exact same thing that we did for column 1. We'll start by working into the second chain of the right square and the second chain on the left square. And then work into each corresponding stitch until the next 2 chains. When you get to the 2 chain stitches, always just work in the first of 2 chain stitches. And then join the next 2 squares by working into the second chain and then into each corresponding stitch. I am almost finished joining squares H and J, and now I'm going to work into the first chain only of these 2 squares. And now I'm going to join square I and square M, working into the second chain and the second chain. Now working into the corresponding stitches. I'm now at the next 2 chains, so I'm going to work into the first of 2 chains. And now I'm not going to fasten off. We are going to flip our bag over and continue working on column 2 all the way up. So we are now joining square E and square M. For square E, we're going to find that second chain and work into the outer loop. And we're going to work into the second chain of square M, but since we've already worked into it, we're just going to continue along, but this is still technically the second chain. Just continue where you left off. And now work into the corresponding stitches. To finish joining squares E and M, work into the first chain only. Now we're going to join squares C and D by working into the second chain of both squares. and then working into the corresponding stitches. Now we're going to finish joining squares C and D by working into the first chain. And now we're going to join squares A and K. And we'll start by working into the second chain. And then resume working into the corresponding stitches. I am almost finished joining these last two squares. The last step is to work into the first chain only of both squares. Now we're going to fasten off, leaving about an 8-inch tail, and pull that tail through the loop that was on your hook. Next, we're going to join the bottoms, and we want to ensure that the front of our bag, so we can tell here this is the front of our bag, we want that to be facing us. We're going to start with this first bottom, and we're going to be starting here and joining this square and the square underneath it, starting here and ending here. So we'll start by making a slip knot, placing it on our hook. We want square D, which is on the front, to be on our right hand side, and square J, which is on the back, to be on our left. So you can position this however you'd like, but we want these two squares to be joined like this. So starting with square D, which is on the front of our bag, insert your hook into the second chain. And then for square J, which is on the back, work into the second chain as well. Ensure your working yarn is under. And now work into the corresponding stitches of both squares. When you're back at your 2 chains, only work into the first of 2 chains to finish joining these 2 squares. Now we're going to fasten off and pull the tail through the loop that was on your hook. Now we're going to do the same thing for the other bottom squares. We're going to be joining square E, which is on the front of your bag, and square I, which is on the back of your bag. And we're going to start right here and end right here. Just make sure that the front of your bag is facing up. I'm going to rotate my bag so it's easier to work into, and we're going to be joining our yarn right here. We will start by making a slip knot and placing it on our hook and pulling tight. We're going to start by working into square E, which is the square on our right and on the front of the bag, and we're going to be working into the second chain here. You can see that the first chain has already been worked into. So we're going to work into the second chain, and on the square from the back, which is square I, we're going to work into the second chain, which is again the one that's not been worked into, working into the outer loop of this second chain. So working into the outer loop of the second chain and working into the second chain on the back square. And now work into each corresponding stitch. As you approach the end of these 2 squares, it can get a little tricky to see. So I thought I'd point out, I've got one last stitch to work into. It's the top of this stitch here. So I'll work into the outer loop, and then right after that is the first chain. And we won't be working into the second chain, which is the one that's already been worked into. On the back square, here's the last stitch. Working into the outer loop, and then there's the first chain, working into the outer loop of that chain. It can get a little awkward at this point. Take your time. Lastly, we will work into the first chain only of square E, which is the square on the front, and then work into the first chain only of square I, which is the square on the back. Then fasten off And that completes the columns and the bottoms. Now we're going to start joining rows. To start joining rows, we're going to start with squares along the back. As you can see here, the front of our bag is facing us, so we're going to flip it over. We're going to start by joining square G and square F. So we're going to attach our yarn right here. I'm going to rotate my bag so it's easier to work into, and I'm going to remove this strand of yarn here. And from now on, anytime you remove a stitch marker or a strand of yarn, you don't need to replace it because the join line should now hold everything in place. So we're going to attach our yarn here and we're going to be working all the way down. We're going to start by making a slip knot and placing it on our hook. We're going to start by working into square H into the second chain. The second chain is right here. The first chain has already been worked into. So we're going to work into the second chain of square H, and then we'll work into the second chain of square G. So working in the second chain of square H on our right, and the second chain of square G on our left. And now work into the corresponding stitches until the next two chains. We're nearing our first intersection, and I wanted to show you using the multicolored squares exactly what happens. I've just finished making my last flat slip stitch in the corresponding stitches, and I'm now at the place where there's two chains. So we are going to work into this first chain here, the one that has not been worked in, into the outer loop, just like we normally do. So working into this first chain, the unworked chain, just like we normally do, working into the outer loops. We make our flat slip stitch. Now there's the second chain that has already been worked into, but we're going to skip over that. We're going to also skip over this join line. We are not going to work into any of the stitches that were made when we joined the columns. Now we're going to join the next two squares. We're going to be working over the column, and we are going to work into the first of two chains. This first chain has already been worked into, but we're still going to insert our hook into the outer loop of this first chain on both squares and make our first flat slip stitch by working into the first of two chains. So skipping over the second chain and the join line, working into the first chain of the next square on your right into the outer loop, even though it's going to be tight, and then working into the outer loop of the first chain on the left square and making our flat slip stitch. So our row is going to go over our column. Next, we're going to work into the second chain into the outer loop, and this is the chain that has not been worked in. On this square here, here's the second chain, working into the outer loop like we normally do. These chain stitches can get small. Take your time and still work into them, working into the second chain and into the second chain. And that's how we work over the column. Now we resume working into the corresponding stitches. Now let's do this on the actual bag. Here's the first chain, working into the outer loop of that first chain, the unworked chain. These can be tight and a little bit awkward to work into. We are not going to work into the second chain on these squares. We're going to jump over the column, not work into it, and we are going to work into the first chain right here into the outer loop on the right square. And find that first chain on the left square, outer loop, even though it's already been worked into, making sure your working yarn is under those loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull that yarn through all 3 loops. Now we're going to work into the second chain, which has become quite small compared to the next stitch, but still we're going to work into it. And here's the second chain on the left square. Working into the outer loop and the outer loop of that second chain. And now we can resume working into the corresponding stitches. I'm now at the chain stitches for squares J and K, and we're only going to work into the first chain on both squares. Now we're going to flip the bag over, and now we're going to continue row 1 all the way up the front. We're now going to join squares D and K. For square D, we're going to work into the second chain. This is the chain that has not been worked into yet. So working into the outer loop of that second chain. And then for square K on our left, we're going to continue working. We're going to work into the second chain of square K. And now resume working into the corresponding stitches. I'm now at the chain stitches of squares D and K, and we're going to work into the first chain only of these 2 squares. We're not going to work into the second chain, and we're going to skip the column. Next, we're going to join squares C and A. We're going to work into the first chain. This is the chain that's already been worked into. We're going to work into that outer loop on square C and find that outer loop of that first chain on square A. Going over the column and into this first chain. And now work into the second chain. You can see it's quite small, but still work into it. And now resume working into the corresponding stitches. When we get to the 2 chain stitches, we're going to work into the first chain only of square C and the first chain only of square A. Working into the first chain of square C and the first chain of square A. And to finish the row, we're going to fasten off and pull the tail through the loop that was on our hook. Now we're going to start row 2. As you can see right here, we have the front of our bag facing us, but we want to start on the back. So let's flip our bag over. Now the back of the bag is facing us. We are going to join squares L and F. So let's rotate our work so that those 2 squares are facing us. And we're going to start right here and work all the way down the back. So once again, we're going to make a slip knot and place it on our hook. Square L is on our right, square F is on our left. So we're going to take square L, which we're going to take this folded corner here and find the second of 2 chain stitches. So this is the first stitch that we'll work into, and then the second chain of the square on our left. So find that second chain and the second chain. And now work into the corresponding stitches all the way up. I'm at the chain stitches now. We're going to work into the first chain only of these 2 squares. skip the second chain, skip the join line, and then working into the next 2 squares, working into the first chain and the first chain, and then the second chain and the second chain. And then work into the corresponding stitches. I'm almost finished joining square I and H. We're going to do the exact same thing we just did. We're only going to work into the first chain and the first chain, skip the next chain, skip the join line, and then work into the first chain of the next square and the first chain of the next square. And also work into the second chain and the second chain. And now just work into the corresponding stitches. These are squares M and J. These are our last 2 squares along the back. I'm at the chains, and now I'm going to work into the first chain only and the first chain only. Now we're going to flip our bag over. Now the front of our bag is facing us, and we're continuing working on square M. We're going to continue right where we left off and work into the second chain and work into the second chain of square D. Now resume working into the corresponding stitches. Now we're going to do the same thing we've done at the other intersections. Work into the first chain only, skip the next chain, skip the join line, and work into the first chain of the next square and the first chain of the next square. Work into the second chain, the square on our right, and the second chain, the square on our left. And we're going to work into the corresponding stitches. To finish joining squares E and C, once again work into the first chain only, skip over the join line, and then to join squares L and B, you're going to work into the first chain and the second chain, and then into each corresponding stitch. At the very end of joining squares L and B, only work into the first chain and the first chain. And that concludes row 2. Fasten off and pull the tail through. And now your squares are all joined. We are not going to weave in our loose ends. I'm going to tuck mine into the bag so they're not all over the place. We're going to keep these around until we add the bag border, because we can use these to fix any unwanted gaps between these join lines and the bag border. Now we are going to add the bag border and the strap. As you can see here, the front of my bag is facing up. We're going to be attaching a new strand of yarn to the front of the bag in this stitch right here. This is the top right square on the front of the bag, and in the corner here there's 2 chain stitches, one that's already been worked in and one that hasn't been worked in. Then find the first stitch to the left of those 2 chain stitches. Here's this first stitch, and we're going to attach a new strand of yarn to the top of this first stitch through both loops, and we'll be attaching our yarn with a slip stitch. So insert your hook into the top of that stitch, place a new strand of yarn on your hook and pull it through the stitch, and then make a slip stitch. Working into the same stitch, we're going to make a single crochet stitch. It's okay if it's a little loose. It'll get tightened up when we weave in our ends. Now place a stitch marker in the top of that single crochet stitch that we just made. Next, we're going to single crochet, just make one single crochet in each stitch until we get to the peak. At the peak, you will see 2 chain stitches, and we are not going to be working into those chain stitches. So our last stitch will be right here, which is the last stitch, the top of the last stitch. So simply make a single crochet stitch in each stitch until the peak, or those 2 chain stitches. If at any point during this round you come across an invisible join, only work into the front loop only when making a single crochet stitch into that invisible join. I found working under it made too much of a gap and thought it looked much nicer if you only work into the front loop only of that invisible join, and then resume working into both loops of the next stitch. I've just single crocheted all the way up to the first peak. Now I'm at the chain 2 space. We're not going to work into the chain stitches. Into the chain 2 space, we're going to make 3 single crochet stitches into the same space. 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to make a single crochet stitch in each of the stitches until we get to the first valley. And the valley is this V between squares. So our next stitch here can be a little tight because it's right next to that chain 2 space. But here's the stitch. It's the top of the first stitch here. Make a single crochet stitch into that and make a single crochet stitch into each stitch until we get to the valley. I'm almost finished single crocheting all the way until the valley. I have one more stitch to work into. It's the top of this last stitch here. So I'm going to make my last single crochet stitch into that stitch. And now we're going to do a special stitch. For this special stitch, we're going to be working into this chain 2 space, this chain 2 space, and this chain 2 space. We're not going to be working into any chains. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to insert our hook into the first chain 2 space. Now I'm going to insert my hook into this chain 2 space. I haven't yarned over, I haven't done anything other than insert my hook into 2 chain 2 spaces at this point. Now we're going to insert our hook into the next chain 2 space. Again, we're not yarning over. All I'm doing is inserting my hook into the next chain 2 space. So I have my hook now through all 3 chain 2 spaces. Now I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to pull the yarn through all 3 chain 2 spaces. Let's go slowly. I've yarned over, I'm going to pull the yarn through the last chain 2 space, the middle chain 2 space, and the first chain 2 space. I now have 2 loops on my hook. I'm going to yarn over and pull that yarn through the 2 loops on my hook. And we've just done a special single crochet 3 together. Now we're going to begin the repeat portion of the round. This is what we're going to be repeating all the way around our bag. The first step is to single crochet in each stitch until the next peak. This is the next peak. There are 2 chain stitches for the next peak. We're not going to work into those chain stitches. So right now, let's just single crochet in each stitch up until the peak. I'm going to show you where the first stitch we're going to work into because it's gotten a little tight after that special stitch. Here's the first stitch, here's the top of it. And we're going to single crochet normally in both loops into the top of that first stitch and then in each stitch until we get to this last stitch here. And into the last stitch, into the top of that, we'll make our last single crochet stitch. So working into the first stitch and then single crochet until the peak. I've just made a single crochet in the top of this last stitch. Next, we're going to work into this chain 2 space, but our stitch marker is in the way. So let's remove the stitch marker, but keep it somewhere on the front. So I'm just going to take it out and put it right here. However, when you come up to that stitch marker again, you might need to keep replacing it, but we want to identify which side is the front. So just always keep replacing it. It's the only purpose of this stitch marker at this point is just to tell us which side is the front. The next set of instructions in this repeat is to make 3 single crochet stitches into this chain 2 space. So don't work into the 2 chains, just working into the space. Make 3 single crochet stitches all in the same space. Next, we are going to single crochet in each stitch until the next valley. Now this valley's folded over, but we're still treating it as a valley because it still is a V. The first place that you'll single crochet into is the top of this stitch, and it's a little tight, but work into the top of that stitch, and then in each stitch until you get to the valley. Your last stitch will be this last stitch here. Into the top of that will be your last single crochet stitch, because then you'll be coming up on the chains and the chain 2 space. I've just single crocheted until the valley. So once again, we're going to be making a special single crochet 3 together in the first chain 2 space, in the second chain 2 space, and into the third chain 2 space. Insert your hook into the first chain 2 space. Don't yarn over, just insert your hook into the second chain 2 space. Don't yarn over, insert your hook into the third chain 2 space. Now yarn over and pull that yarn through all 3 chain 2 spaces. And it's okay to help it along. Now you have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull that yarn through both loops. Those are the steps that you're going to repeat all the way around the bag. When you are back to the first stitch made in the round, the stitch with the stitch marker, come back to the video and we'll finish the round together. I've just finished repeating that all the way around. My last stitch here was the special single crochet 3 together. And now I am back to the first stitch made in the round, the stitch with the stitch marker. We're going to remove this marker and make a single crochet stitch into the top of this stitch. So working into the top of that first single crochet stitch into both loops, not the slip stitch that we made when we attached the yarn, but into the single crochet stitch. Into that, make a single crochet stitch. And that completes round 1. Now we're going to start round 2. For this pattern, we are never going to turn, and we're also not going to make any chains when we begin a round. The first step in this round is to make a single crochet stitch in the next stitch. Working into this next stitch, make a single crochet. Now we're going to place a stitch marker into the top of that single crochet stitch that we just made. Now we're going to begin the repeat portion of the round. The first part of our repeat is to single crochet in each stitch until the peak. The peak in this round are the 3 single crochet stitches that we made in the chain 2 space in the previous round. So until we get there, we're not going to work into those 3 stitches. Just start by single crocheting in each stitch until the first of 3 single crochet stitches made in the peak from the previous round. I'm now at the peak. I'm at the 3 single crochet stitches made into the chain 2 space, and we're going to work into the first 2 of those 3 stitches. Into the first 2, we're going to make 1 single crochet stitch in the first one and 1 single crochet stitch into the second one. We are not going to work into the third single crochet stitch. So working in the first, make 1 single crochet stitch, and working into the second or the middle single crochet stitch from the previous round, make 1 single crochet stitch. Now we're going to make our strap, and we're going to make a number of chains which will create the strap. The pattern says to chain 80, which creates a strap that is approximately 26 inches long. You can adjust the size of the strap by making any number of chains. There's no specific multiple required. I will note that the yarn that I'm using for this bag is quite thick compared to other size 4 yarns, and I found making 80 chains with this bag pattern created a longer strap than using a different size 4 yarn. So you may need to experiment with the number of chains that you would like, but for this bag pattern, I'll be chaining 80. So starting right where we ended, we're just going to start making our chains. You go ahead and chain 80 or your desired number of chains. There's no multiple required. With your chains now made, we are going to attach the strap to the third of 3 single crochet stitches made in the chain 2 space in the previous round. So here's the first one, here's the middle one, and here's the third. We are going to attach the strap by making a single crochet stitch into this third stitch from the peak. And this is, as you can see here, it's in the next square. One thing you want to be careful of is to make sure your chain stitches aren't twisted before you attach the strap to the bag. So I've made sure my chains are not twisted. I'm going to insert my hook into the third of 3 single crochet stitches, yarn over, pull that yarn through, 2 loops on my hook, yarn over, and bring that yarn through both loops. Now we're simply going to single crochet in each stitch until the valley. The valley is the 3 stitches that are closest to the valley. So you can easily see which stitch is right in between the 2 squares here. That would be my middle valley stitch. And here's the first valley stitch, here's the middle valley stitch, and here's the last valley stitch. So these 3 stitches are the valley stitches. So we will not be working into those right now as we single crochet in each stitch until the valley. So once you get to these 3 valley stitches, and you can just pick which stitches are the 3 stitches closest to the valley, but we're not going to single crochet into those. We're just going to single crochet in each stitch until those 3 valley stitches. So right after attaching the strap, you just go right into making single crochet stitches until those 3 valley stitches. I've just single crocheted until the 3 valley stitches. And at these 3 valley stitches, we are going to do a special stitch called an invisible single crochet 3 together. And we're going to be working into the front loops only of these 3 valley stitches. The front loop only is the loop closest to us. We're going to be working into the front loop only of the first stitch, the middle stitch, and the third stitch. Here's how we do an invisible single crochet 3 together. Insert our hook into the front loop only of this first valley stitch. We're not going to yarn over. We're going to insert this hook into the next stitch, the middle of the 3 valley stitches, into the front loop only. Next, we'll insert our hook into the front loop only of the third valley stitch. Now we're going to yarn over and pull that yarn through 3 loops on our hook. I have 2 loops left on my hook, yarn over and pull the yarn through the 2 remaining loops. And there's our invisible single crochet 3 together. Those are the steps that you're going to be repeating all the way around. Essentially, you're going to do exactly what we just did on the front of the bag, on the back of the bag. Your last step in repeating those instructions will be to make an invisible single crochet 3 together over these 3 valley stitches, and then you'll be arriving back at the first stitch made in the round, the stitch with the stitch marker. Come back to the video and we'll finish the round together. I've just finished working all the way around. I'm back at the first stitch made in the round. We're now going to remove this marker and single crochet in that stitch. So working into the stitch, make a single crochet stitch. That completes round 2. Now we're going to start round 3. Remember, we never turn and we don't make any chains. We're going to work into the very next stitch and make a single crochet stitch. Now we're going to place a stitch marker in the top of that stitch we just made. Now we're going to begin the repeat portion of the round. Here's what we'll be repeating. We're going to single crochet in each stitch until the strap. The strap is the 80 chains or whatever number of chains you made for the strap. And you can see the difference here. This is where the chains start, and here's my last stitch before those chain stitches. So we're just going to single crochet in each stitch until you get to your first chain stitch. I'm almost at my first chain stitch. I'm going to make one more single crochet in the last stitch before the strap. Now we're going to work into each chain, but we're going to work into the back ridge loops, which are these bumps along the back. So simply rotate your chain towards you and work into the first bump along the back by inserting your hook and then making a regular single crochet stitch. However, when we make our single crochet stitches into each of these back ridge loops, we're going to make our single crochet stitches very loosely. So working into the first chain, rotate your chain, find that back bump, insert your hook into it, and single crochet very loosely. Working into the next back ridge loop, insert your hook and single crochet very loosely. So you go ahead and do this in each back ridge loop all the way across your strap. As you're nearing the end of your strap, come back to the video and we'll finish doing that together. I'm almost finished making single crochet stitches into each chain. I have 1 chain left to work into. So working into the last chain, into the back ridge loop, single crochet loosely. Now we're going to single crochet in each stitch until the next valley. I wanted to point out this first single crochet stitch because with the chain attached, it can be a little tricky to see. Here's the top of that stitch, so I'm just working in normally under both loops, and now we can go back just to making regular single crochet stitches. They don't need to be very loose. So our last single crochet stitch before the valley is this stitch right here. Now that we're at the valley, we're going to make an invisible single crochet 3 together by working into the first valley stitch, the middle valley stitch, and the last valley stitch. Once again, insert your hook under the front loop only of that first stitch, then insert your hook into the front loop only of the middle stitch, and then insert your hook into the front loop only of the last valley stitch. Now yarn over, bringing that yarn through only 3 loops on your hook. 2 loops left, yarn over and bring that yarn through both remaining loops. Those are the steps that you're going to repeat all the way around. When you're back at the first stitch made in the round, come back to the video and we'll finish the round together. I've just worked all the way around. I'm now back at the first stitch made. We're going to remove this stitch marker and work into this stitch. So working into this stitch, we're going to single crochet. And that completes round 3. Now we're going to start round 4. And when we get to round 5, we're going to be repeating the exact same thing that we do in this round. The first step is to single crochet in the next stitch. Now we're going to place our stitch marker in the top of that stitch. Now we're going to begin the repeat portion of the round. The first step is to single crochet in each stitch until the strap. If you can see here, here is my first single crochet stitch that I made in the strap, which means this is the last single crochet stitch that's part of the bag border. So we're going to single crochet up until this stitch right here. I am now at the strap. We are now going to switch and make waistcoat single crochet stitches in each stitch on the strap. The only difference between a regular single crochet stitch and a waistcoat single crochet stitch is where we insert our hook. Normally when we make single crochet stitches, we insert our hook under the top 2 loops. Each single crochet stitch that we made in the previous round is a V shape. We're going to insert our hook in the middle of this V. We're going to insert our hook right in between the legs of the post and insert our hook right in here. By doing this, it's going to help our strap stretch less and curl less. If you make regular single crochet stitches all the way through the strap, I found it really curled and I found it quite stretchy. So we don't want our strap to stretch too much, and this is going to help. So instead of working under the top of 2 loops, we're going to insert our hook right in between the legs of the post in the middle of the V, and then single crochet as we normally would. It's going to be quite tight, and that's why we wanted to single crochet very loosely in the previous round. So working into the very first stitch of the strap, insert your hook into the middle of the V, just like that. Yarn over, pull the yarn through, and it can be tight. 2 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull the yarn through both loops. So we finish it just like a regular single crochet stitch, and it looks just like a regular single crochet stitch, but the placement of the stitch is different. We're going to be doing this in each stitch across the strap. Here's the next stitch, here's the V. We're going to insert our hook into the middle of the V. And even when I single crocheted loosely, I still found it very tight. Take your time and single crochet. I found it helped to stretch out my work a little bit so I can really differentiate the stitches. And you're going to keep doing this all the way across the strap. I'm almost finished the strap. I have 1 more stitch to make a waistcoat single crochet stitch into before I get to the bag border. This can be hard to tell which stitch is part of the strap and which stitch is part of the bag border, and honestly, don't worry too much about it. You don't want to go too far into the bag border doing waistcoat stitches, but it's also okay if it's not exactly the right stitch that you start the bag border on. So just like we have been working into the middle of the V, I'm going to make my last waistcoat single crochet stitch into that stitch. Now that I'm back at the bag border, we're going to resume making regular single crochet stitches until the 3 valley stitches. This just means to resume working under the top loops, just like we normally make regular single crochet stitches all the way until the valley. Here's my first stitch after my last waistcoat stitch, and just make a regular single crochet stitch, and then single crochet regularly until the 3 valley stitches. I'm now at the 3 valley stitches, so we're going to do our invisible single crochet 3 together. Just a reminder, you're only working in the front loops only. And that's what you're going to be repeating all the way around. When you're back at the first stitch made, come back to the video. I am now back to the first stitch made. We're going to remove this stitch marker, but keeping note of where that stitch marker was, and single crochet into that stitch. That completes round 4. For round 5, you're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to repeat all the instructions from round 4. I'm right at the end of round 5, which is repeating round 4. So I'm at that first stitch made in the round. I'm removing the marker and single crocheting in that stitch. This is now the end of round 5. We are going to use the invisible join technique to finish the round. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to remove our hook from the stitch, and we're going to cut the yarn that's attached to the skein, leaving about an 8-inch tail. Now we're going to pull the tail through the stitch and put that tail through our yarn needle. The last time we did an invisible join, when we finished our granny squares, we worked into the first stitch. I found that for this section of the pattern, it was actually better to work into the second stitch. So not the first stitch, but into the second stitch. And do the same thing we did when we used this technique for our granny squares. So I'm going to skip the next stitch, working into the next stitch, go through both loops, pull the yarn through. Now we're going to work into the last stitch made in the round, but we're only going to insert our hook into the back loop only. We're going to insert our hook into the back loop and this loop here that's parallel to the back loop. So going into the back loop and then finding this parallel loop, which is a little small, and then pulling our yarn all the way through. But remember, we don't want to pull too tight. We want it to resemble a stitch. And now we weave in our tail into the back of our work. We want to hide the tail by working into the back of stitches, but also ensuring that it's nice and secure. So change directions, and you can do this a few times until it's nice and secure. Once it's secure, cut your remaining yarn. And now we have this beautiful invisible join. Now we're going to be doing the front inside of the bag border and strap. For this front inside section, we want to make sure that the front of our bag is facing us. So we're attaching our yarn under the strap into the third of 3 single crochet stitches made in the chain 2 space. So we'll be inserting our hook into this third single crochet stitch and joining or attaching our yarn with a slip stitch. So insert your hook into that stitch, place a new strand of yarn on your hook and pull it through and make a slip stitch. It's going to be loose, but it'll tighten up once you weave in your loose ends. Into this same stitch, we're going to single crochet. Now we're going to place a stitch marker into that stitch. Now we're going to single crochet in each stitch until the 3 valley stitches. At the valley, we'll do our invisible single crochet 3 together. So working into the front loops only. Now we're going to single crochet in each stitch until the strap. You can remove your stitch marker, but place it somewhere else on the front. I'm going to place mine around the post of this stitch here. Now single crochet all the way into the strap. As you approach the strap, it can be tricky to see which are stitches. So let's take a look here. I've just single crocheted in the first of 3 single crochet stitches made in the chain 2 space. So I have one more single crochet stitch to work into before I get to the strap. If you take a closer look, these are actually the sides of stitches here, and then our first chain that we'll be working into is right here. So I'm going to make my last single crochet stitch before the strap. When we get to the strap, we're going to be working into both loops of each chain stitch all across the strap. So we'll insert our hook under both loops, and we're going to single crochet, but we're going to single crochet very, very loosely. So here's my last single crochet stitch from the bag border. Now I'm going to insert my hook under both loops of the first chain stitch and single crochet loosely. There may be a small gap here, but we can use the tails that we've saved from joining to fix any gaps that you find unsightly. So working into each chain stitch under both loops, single crochet loosely. And do this all the way across the strap and come back to the video when you're back at the bag border. I'm now at the end of the strap, and the next step is to remove this marker and single crochet in the top of this stitch. So working in the top of that first stitch, single crochet. Again, there might be a little gap here, but we can fix that with our tails. Now we're going to put the stitch marker into that stitch that we just made. Now we're going to start round 2. We are going to single crochet into each stitch until the 3 valley stitches. At these 3 valley stitches, we'll do our invisible single crochet 3 together. Now we're going to single crochet in each stitch until we get to the strap. I'm almost at the strap, just wanted to show you the difference between the stitches on the bag border and those on the strap. So I have 2 stitches left before my first stitch on the strap. And once again, there's lots of flexibility here. If you don't work into the exact right stitch, which is the first stitch on the strap, it's absolutely okay if this was your first stitch on the strap. The bag's still gonna look beautiful. I'm going to use this as my first stitch on the strap, and we are going to switch to making waistcoat single crochet stitches into each stitch all the way across the strap. So not working into the top loops, but in the middle of the V, single crochet. And do this in each stitch until you're back at the bag border. I'm almost finished making waistcoat single crochet stitches. I have 2 more stitches to work into. Just wanted to show you what that looks like. So I'll work into those last 2 stitches, making waistcoat single crochet stitches. We're going to remove this marker and work into that stitch. And into this stitch, we're going to make a regular single crochet stitch by inserting our hook under the top 2 loops. Working into that stitch, just make a regular single crochet stitch. Now we're going to put our stitch marker into the top of that stitch we just made. For round 3, we're going to be repeating almost the exact same steps that we just did in round 2. The only difference between the 2 rounds is what happens when we get back to the stitch with the stitch marker. Otherwise, the instructions are exactly the same. Single crochet in each stitch until the 3 valley stitches. Make your invisible single crochet 3 together in those 3 valley stitches. single crochet in each stitch until the strap. Our last regular single crochet stitch will be the top of this stitch here. And then we're going to switch to making waistcoat single crochet stitches in each stitch across the strap. So your last single crochet stitch here, then go right into waistcoat single crochet stitches all across the strap, and then come back to the video. I'm almost finished the strap here, and you can really see now that we have a beautiful strap that's even on both sides. It doesn't stretch too much, and it lays flat. It doesn't curl. And here's my last stitch on the strap. Now we're going to remove that stitch marker, and into that stitch we are going to make a regular single crochet stitch. So insert your hook under the top 2 loops of that stitch and single crochet. We are not going to put our stitch marker back into that stitch. We're going to go right into round 4. For round 4, we're going to make regular single crochet stitches all the way until the 3 valley stitches. Now we're going to make our invisible single crochet 3 together over the 3 valley stitches. Now we're going to single crochet in each stitch until the strap. It can be tricky to tell which is the first stitch of the strap, and honestly, it's okay if you don't have the exact right stitch, but to show you mine, here is my first stitch of the strap. You can see this stitch goes into the V of the stitch below, so this is my first strap stitch. So right here will be the last single crochet stitch that I work into. And then we're going to use the invisible join technique to finish the round. So I'm going to single crochet all the way into the top of this stitch right here. So I've just finished making my last single crochet stitch. We are going to leave the rest of the stitches in the round unworked. We're going to finish right here. So remove our hook, cut the yarn that's attached to the skein, pull that tail through the stitch, put our yarn through our yarn needle, and once again, I'm not going to work into the next stitch. I'm going to work into the following stitch, inserting my needle through both loops, pulling the yarn through, and then going back to that last stitch that we made, working in the back loop only and into the loop that's parallel, pulling my yarn needle through. And now I'm going to weave this end through the backs of stitches and going in the opposite direction to make sure it's nice and secure. Once it's nice and secure, you can cut any remaining yarn. And that concludes the front inside of the bag border and strap. Now we're going to flip the bag over. As you can see, this is the front of the bag. We're going to flip it over so the back of the bag is now facing us. And you're going to repeat the exact same thing that we did for the front inside, but this time on the back of the bag. However, the instructions are exactly the same. You'll attach your yarn right here and follow all of those rounds right up until that invisible join that we did to finish the front inside. You'll do that on the back inside. After finishing the back inside, the last step is to weave in all your loose ends. And you can use these tails to fix any gaps. So you see there's a bit of a gap right here. If you want, you could weave this tail around these stitches just to close up that gap. And also, if you see there's any gaps where the ends of your join lines are, you can use the tails from those join lines to make them more cohesive and attached. After you weave in all your loose ends, you now have a brand new flower granny square bag. That concludes this video tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy making this bag. I'd love to see your finished bags. I am here if you have any questions or if there's anything at all I can do to help. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.